Being in love simply isn't enough. At least not if you want to create the kind of passionate, dirty, crazy, electrical connection that keeps your partner craving more. In this episode, we are diving into what actually works to create mind-blowing intimacy that goes beyond just another hookup or routine relationship. Because the truth is, maybe you've noticed that initial spark tends to fade, even in a great relationship. Or maybe you're wondering why simply caring about someone deeply doesn't automatically translate to amazing sex. Today, we are breaking down the missing piece that most incredible men like you haven't quite figured out yet. And it is so much simpler than you think. Welcome back to The Naked Connection. This is the show that supports driven men to reach sexual mastery and build deep connections. Take a moment right now and be sure to hit subscribe so that you don't miss a single episode. It's Kirsten, and today we are joined by Angela Ivy Leong. She is a Tantra practitioner, a psychotherapist, and a researcher who is here to share 3 surprisingly simple Tantric practices that tap into something deeper than just physical attraction or emotional love. So with that, let's get some. Angela Ivy Leong, welcome to The Naked Connection.
Thanks for having me, Kirsten.
Yeah.
I'm super excited to be chatting about all things sex and sexuality and Tantra.
Could you kick us off by first explaining what is this KISS method that you explore in your work?
So KISS stands for ketamine-induced self and sexuality synchronization. So we use ketamine-assisted psychotherapy to assist people with sexual dysfunctions, to enhance their connections and their relationships with others. But it also takes into consideration that there's a whole self-actualization component that needs to go into this, like the healing of yourself, of your own traumas, and to understand what is your purpose here on earth. That is a key part of having healthy, successful relationships. I'm a huge fan of Stan Tack, and he has his method called strategic couples therapy. And he says the same thing, right? When you're in a relationship, same with John and Julie Gottman, when you're in a relationship, if you want that relationship to be solid, you and your partner need to understand and figure out what is your mission and your purpose for being together. Mm-hmm. And I think not enough people have thought that through before getting into a relationship. And that's why they tend to fail. Love is not enough. It's a feeling, it's fleeting, and it's definitely supportive of the whole process. And love can actually even be healing, but it doesn't heal everything, right? If you haven't figured out what is the purpose for you being on this earth and what is the purpose of you being with this partner that you've chosen, that's a shaky foundation to build love on.
This piece about the purpose sounds really powerful, and that experience of love isn't enough. And so if you aren't connected with your purpose, or that it sounds like the purpose of why you are with this person, that seems like a question that I don't hear people ask that often, other than like, oh, we're in love, so like we should be together.
Exactly.
What comes up for people when they're moving through this? What type of purpose do couples typically find?
What type of purpose?
Yeah, I guess really I'm thinking like, what would be an example of a couple being like, oh, now I know why I'm with this person?
The best example that comes to my mind right away, I have 2 really good friends who met at Burning Man, and now they've built a camp together at Burning Man. And it's very clear to me, like their mission in life and their purpose for being is not only to have a family and to share a child and to create love within their little family, but their purpose together is to embody the 10 principles at Burning Man and to bring people there for transformation purposes, to heal, to see a new horizon, like a deeper perspective, another perspective to life. And they definitely walk the walk. And I would say that's the clearest example that I've seen of a shared mission and a purpose with a set of values that they both agree on.
Wow. And then that's a beautiful example. I think even if someone's like, I don't even know what Burning Man is, or that seems like a big thing, thinking, oh, am I supposed to like build a business or something with my partner? Even a smaller version of that, of having values together, identifying
Exactly.
your values and building a relationship that's rooted in those values.
Exactly. I think when it comes to building a secure, functioning relationship, two people need to come together and be super clear on what are our values that shape the culture of our relationship. And ideally, you should document that. You should write that down on a piece of paper and reflect on it once every 1 to 3 years, for example. Are we still in alignment with all of this? If people are not able to negotiate and talk through stuff like this, that's when they need to come into therapy and maybe do this with someone to facilitate the process of how that's supposed to look like, right? How to fairly negotiate something. Because at the same time, as you don't want to totally give up who you are in service of the whole, but there needs to be some sort of like a molding of a third entity that you're creating in this union. Actually, my partner and I came up with that third entity concept, and we realized, I don't know if you heard of it, the I thou, right? And the space in between. And we realized when you dialogue to create this I thou experience, you're also creating a third entity that is your relationship. It's not just this person, it's not just that person, but the combination of the two of you and the synergy of the two of you when you come together and you bring together your complementary skills, there's a third entity that emerges.
Yeah, I'm just thinking for someone that's listening, and they're like, what do I do with this idea of this third entity or these values? Is the process of actually, as you kind of mentioned, sitting down, being like, what are we building? What is our purpose together? So that we're not just cohabitating, we're co-creating something and starting there to see what comes up. And I'm even wondering too about even perhaps going back a step of like, a man that is in search of his own purpose, independent of the relationship, first and foremost. I remember reading The Way of the Superior Man by David Deida, and he talked about how a man's purpose is, and that is the most important thing in a man's life, ultimately. And then the relationship comes after that. So wondering through whether it's through the KISS method or some other way of identifying what that is, what your thoughts are on that piece of it.
I think you're touching upon something that I just said to a friend yesterday. I think male or female, you need to be in touch with this purpose, as David Deida said, before you come into a relationship, because that can shift, right? And that can lead your relationship to go off in different directions if your purpose is in direct conflict with someone else's purpose, for example. And that can show up in a multitude of ways. Let's say, for example, one person, like they realize that their purpose is to save the dolphins, and they realize that's the core thing that makes them happy. And therefore they need to be in a city where they can take out this kind of work in some way, shape, or form. But the other person's purpose is, I'm here on Earth to like scale the Himalayas, the ice mountains, and I need to be there in order for me to feel fulfilled as a person. These two people are never going to be able to fulfill each other no matter how much they love each other. And that's why we say love sometimes is not enough. I mean, like temporarily it may be, but at some point when you have, this is something that all animals in the animal kingdom, including very small cellular organisms, we get used to someone. We get familiar with someone. And that love feeling, that initial intensity of love is not enough to keep people together. It works in the beginning because as biological creatures that we are, our imperative is to procreate, just like every cell in the animal kingdom, right? And like that initial juice of that attraction is there to make sure that we procreate as an animal species. But because we're higher thinking creatures, like we have this capacity to be clear and forward thinking about, is this person going to fit into my life?
Yeah.
I've certainly had clients where they were just too different, right? And the Gottmans will say this too. Your personalities are too different. Your lifestyles are too different. If your idea of health is too different, even like these, you're not going to be able to stay together for the long term. And that's going to result in a lot of pain, tears, and frustrations if there's a lot of shared stuff involved, like children, property, and finances.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? We're just trying to help people avoid all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I imagine even thinking about this from the dating space, like if someone is out there looking for a partner, to ask themselves these kind of questions or to check in if they're with someone right now and maybe they're starting to recognize, wow, I have this lust, I have this passion, this connection. But if I'm really honest, we have nothing in common. We have different visions for our future. Like, and they're kind of listening, being like, oh my gosh, wait, hold on. Then what do you do with that? Because there is this love and it can be hard to walk away from that.
Yeah, we're really creative people as human beings. If one person is more flexible, as in they haven't fully formulated exactly how they're going to carry out their purpose. And I think especially with the internet these days, we can do so many things with so much flexibility. Like you can somehow figure out a way where you both get your purposes fulfilled and still have a shared purpose for being together in terms of how to support each other's life. So that's all possible. That I think those are the ones that create the most romantic love stories, is that the ones that triumph through hell and high water to be together and they manage to make it work because of flexibility. And I think that's where psychedelics are really important. One of the core functions of psychedelics is that it reduces mental rigidity, and it goes through psilocybin mushrooms, ketamine, anything that releases BDNF in the brain-derived nootropic factor, right? And I believe that ketamine may be even a superior mechanism, a superior substance for this mechanism, because it acts on the glutamate receptor, and the glutamate receptors are responsible for learning and memory. As opposed to in psilocybin, for example, that acts on the serotonin receptor. It's just a different kind of receptor responsible for happiness and other things, right? So when it comes to learning or relearning new habits, or letting go of bad habits, or just getting into a different sort of routine of how you see things and how you feel about things, ketamine might be the superior psychedelic here. There's a new study that psychedelics even help us with sexual dysfunctions as well, because it helps us step into our bodies. We need to be in connection with our bodies to be in connection with our sensuality and our sexuality, and therefore to be having the most magnificent sex. We need to have that connection with the body.
Can we explore that a little bit? I'm curious and whether that's looking at this Tantric component or otherwise, about how to integrate more of that into someone's experience.
So first of all, what is Tantra? Tantra it's a set of ancient practices from India. It was originally an oral tradition. It was passed on orally, from person to person. And it was first documented in writing by Chinese Buddhists around 600 CE. So it's actually a set of practices that uses sexuality to evoke spiritual development, enlightenment, if you will. And a lot of my teaching was around white Tantra, which is for this purpose of enlightenment. But there's also red Tantra, which is just for the enjoyment of sexuality for its own sake. And then there's black Tantra, which is more like working with the dark arts there. With regards to how this integrates into sex therapy in my practice, I mean, I think a lot of couples come in not realizing how powerful sexual connection is and how healing that it could be. And one of the first things I try to get them to embody, which I've learned from my Tantra practices, is the power of eye contact. There's something really profound about eye contact that you hold, right? Which is unwavering eye contact when you connect left eye to left eye. They say it's the window to the soul for that reason, that it can evoke a lot in people. I think a lot of times people have learned to avoid eye contact because they're hiding something that they're ashamed about inside. There's something really erotic about like when our partners, they see us. I think men and women, we all crave to be seen in all of us. And there's nothing more sexy and erotic than that level of emotional connection.
For anyone listening and just like thinking about the practice of eye gazing and how entering into that, whether it is before, during a sexual experience or otherwise, it can be I mean, profoundly moving and emotional in
Mhm.
a lot of different ways. If someone's with their partner, what would be the way that you would recommend starting to invite just this very first component of a tantric practice into their life?
Totally. You just want to set aside a few moments at the end of the day to just eye gaze. As I said, connecting your left eye to the other person's left eye. And you can set a timer for up to 7 minutes. You can even play a song in the background and just try to see, what are these eyes what are they trying to say to me? What are the deeper layers of this person that's beyond the physical? Right. In Tantra, we were taught that there's 5 subtle bodies, that there's an emotional layer, a cognitive layer, there's a spiritual layer, an energetic layer, and then there's like the karmic seed of someone. You're looking into like the origins of like where their soul came from. And to connect with someone this deeply is profound. I mean, most people haven't been looked at that deeply. Yeah, and this is one of my favorite things to teach in my Tantra workshops. I had actually taught it at Burning Man about Mahatma Wins, and people were saying that it was the most profound experience that they've ever had at Burning. It's like their favorite moment, having someone see some really private part of them, like a total stranger, without having known any details about their life, was able to pinpoint seeing who exactly that they were. And as you know, like with couples, it's so important for us to constantly be looking at our partners with fresh eyes, to continuously be curious about them, to ask yourself, is there something that I don't know yet, that I haven't learned yet? Because we're fighting against this biological imperative to habituate, which means to just get used to someone being there. You can trust that they're not going to go away, like that they're unchanging. And in pop culture, we say that, we call it taking for granted. But there's a reason why we habituate. It serves us, right? When we can acknowledge that this person is like there, I don't need to do anything to keep their attention or make sure that they're attached to me. I can focus on other things in my life, building my business, making money, raising children. So there's a reason our brains decide to do this, right? And sometimes we have to remind ourselves to get out of that if we want to continue to maintain this sense of erotic connection with our partner, that they're not just a wallpaper, right? They're not just a furniture that you've kind of gotten used to as part of your environment.
Yeah.
That they're an ever-changing person as well. And you better keep track of that ever-changing person before they've changed into something that you don't know anymore, that you've lost touch with. You haven't changed alongside them.
Especially when a couple has been together for so long, I think there's these assumptions that start to form of like, oh, I know them, or I don't need to ask them this question because I know what they're going to say, because 2 years ago I asked them and they gave me an answer. And so
Totally.
it's like looking
Exactly.
at your partner through the lens of, this is someone that I will never fully know.
Yeah, exactly.
And then that creates, I would imagine, this sense of perpetual newness that I think we want and crave, right? The newness and
Exactly.
the novelty. And you can find that within the person because they are new and so are you.
Exactly. Exactly.
And okay, I'm wondering, maybe they're like, okay, I've got the eye gazing down. I'm doing that. We're connecting at night. What else could be brought into the space?
Yeah, my favorite one to teach people from tantric practices is the yab yum. It's where the smaller partner, usually that's the female, but the person that's of a smaller stature would sit on top of the other person. So your partner will be sitting cross-legged on the floor, and you'll be sitting on top with your legs perpendicular from his body, sort of behind him, usually the male. And you could either touch forehead to forehead and just rock back and forth. You can even eye gaze from this vantage point and rock back and forth. It's very intimate because your whole chakra system will be aligned and touching with each other. Like your genitals will be grazing each other, but not inserted. And that whole rocking back and forth is also very soothing and it's very evocative of parent-child relationships. And what you can add to that as well is like the breath work. As you breathe into his mouth, he will inhale your breath and rock backwards. And as he breathes out into her mouth, and she'll inhale that in and rock backwards. So there's something also really erotic inducing about that breath work as well. You're exchanging energy between the two if you believe in that, right?
Yeah.
And that's something that I learned from my Tantra teachers here in British Columbia, Krista and Naomi. And even with a perfect stranger, there can be an energy that's produced, right? And with your partner, there can be some intensity that you may not expect to be produced from that as well. And it's meant to be a meditative practice. It's meant to be like an energy chakra awakening practice, an exchange of masculine and feminine energy, a really like beautiful nightly wind down routine to recommend my couples.
I love this. It's so interesting to me because I think that, and I could be mistaken here, but from what I've heard and understand, when people think of Tantra, they think it's very extreme and marathon sex, which like it can be. And also there's even just these initial two examples, it can be very accessible and you could do both of these for 10 minutes, 5 minutes of eye gazing, 5 minutes of yab yum with breath. And within that 10 minutes, create an incredible connection between the two.
Totally. Yes. Like a different kind of energetic connection, right? I think people don't realize that Master and Johnson, the originators of a lot of concepts that we use in sex therapy, including the intervention called sensate focus, they were inspired by tantric scriptures to develop what they developed. So a lot of what modern sex therapy was inspired by Tantra.
Yeah, I love it. Well, and I'm wondering, let's say that someone's on board and they're like, I want to start here. I want to dive into these things. But then they're afraid that maybe their partner would be turned off by it, or maybe they feel uncomfortable being like, hey, I want to try this. Or maybe even if someone is dating someone and they're in the beginning stages of exploring their sexuality together, how to invite in something that might not necessarily be mainstreamed normal. I could see someone being like, oh, this is going to be awkward if I ask this girl to straddle me and breathe into my mouth, you know?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that's more in the category of sexual shyness. Right. If you feel shy or self-conscious about introducing something new into your sexual relationship or your relationship in general, this is where people tend to end up into stalemates, whether it's Tantra or not, right? Because our sexual needs can change over time. Like we do have as a human species, we do have an appreciation for novelty and what takes us by surprise. And when things start to get methodical and mechanical, you need to kind of stop and ask yourself, is there something new that I can incorporate today? Something different. And if there's shyness around that, then that's something that we need to work on in therapy as to what is that shyness about? Does the shyness spread into other areas in your life? Is it sort of like a ubiquitous sort of shyness problem that we have to deal with? Or is it just specific to sexual shyness? What happened in your life that led to you feeling shy about asking a partner to try something new? It really goes down to basics before, it's not about needing to adopt fancy methods. It's about asking yourself, what is this discomfort and shyness about? If there's stuff that's in you that has not healed, it's going to show up in your relationship. And that's why there's like a self. One of the S's stands for self, right? You need to synchronize yourself with that partner, but still remain yourself. You cannot lose yourself, but there's a certain amount of flexibility that you need to have to create a third entity, a harmonious relationship with your partner.
It's so interesting how what unfolds in our sex life and in just in intimate exchanges with people can really bring out the shadows or the reality of the rest of our life. That's one of the things that I love most about this is how how connected it all is and how almost like a mirror our sex life is with the rest of our self and our life as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I just told one of my clients today that what you get, what you put out there, right? Life is a mirror.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's really important to make sure that you have clarity as to who you are and that you've dealt with a good amount of your stuff, right? At least you're aware. Right?
Yeah.
You can't expect your partner to do all of your healing for you. I mean, I think there is some amount of healing together, right? Your childhood habit of how you relate with other people, especially close, intimate others, are going to show up when you enter into a relationship. And you're going to learn about that in a relationship when any relationship that you enter into.
Okay. I'm thinking for a man that maybe is really wanting to advance what's unfolding in his relationship from this tantric space. Do you have any insight on a practice or just a perspective about enhancing arousal or just deepen the dynamic within the partnership?
I do. I think most men are probably thinking about, what about semen retention? Is that am I going to be able to, bring more sexual potency via semen retention? And I think the answer, at least personally, the answer is yes, right? There's a lot of eroticism and sort of watching a man go through that much devotion to try to master these aspects of the body for your pleasure and for his own pleasure too, right? Men can become multi-orgasmic. Mm-hmm. And there's something really, it's energetically different when you sort of can see a man as kind of trying to activate those parts of him to bring all that energy from his root chakra all the way up to this crown chakra. The quality of sex becomes different.
Many moons ago, I had Taylor Johnson on the show and we talked extensively about semen retention. And yeah, there's definitely a power that comes when an individual takes it upon themselves to master this part of themselves that otherwise in the world, the opposite is kind of being shared of their sex kind of everywhere and to spread your seed all over. And so thinking if a man is able to master that within himself and choose when and how to exchange that energy, there's a lot of power behind that.
Yeah. And I'm not an advocate of seminal retention for years and years for the rest of your life. Like some people have suggested in some scriptures. Even Sarita, who was one of my teachers in Bali, says that the Taoists have actually figured out a good formula. When you're in your 20s, you can ejaculate once a week. When you're in 30s, once every 2 weeks. When you're in your 40s, once a month. That is the general recommendation according to the Taoists. And that might be right for you, that might not be right for you, but either way, you should talk to your partner about what feels good for them, right? Because everyone's so individual and so different, right? She might want you to hold on for 3 hours so you can have a 3-hour sex date. I think this is Kim Anami's suggestion is you need to make space once a week for your 3-hour sex date. That's your gourmet sex, right? And I'm an advocate of that, right? But I'm often working with people with very busy lives and they're trying to accomplish a lot. And it may not be the time in your life to have a 3-hour sex date every week, right? But definitely prioritize that in your life somehow, right? Your sexual connection, because it is a path towards enlightenment. It is a path towards healing. I have heard of people able to spontaneously process some trauma that they've experienced during sex, right? I have heard of people connecting with a sense of godliness through sex, right? And if at the very least, I mean, it's just another variety of having sex. If you don't believe in Tantra or spirituality or not a spiritual person, is fine. But these scriptures do have some ideas as to how to add a sense of variety, some variety into your everyday routine. Right.
Beautiful. There's just an endless discovery. And I know that we've just dropped in lightly to exploring the work that you do and this incredible kiss method that you've developed. And I so appreciate you coming on the show today and exploring the realms of sex, of psychedelics, of spirituality, of all of it. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Kirsten. It's been such a pleasure. Super looking forward to doing this again.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of The Naked Connection. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss another episode. Trust me on this, your sex life and that special someone in your life will thank you for it. And if you really love the show, please take a moment and leave a 5-star review or a written review and let me know what you think. It would mean so much to me and this show. Until next time, happy connecting.